Hello, everybody. I'm Edwin. I'm the online editor at Official Xbox Magazine, and I'm here with.
Hello, I'm Keith Stuart from The Guardian.
And we're here to talk about Tomb Raider, which has been released and has been getting quite a warm reception. Not quite sort of ecstatic, I think, but.
It's been quite guarded, hasn't it? It's getting lots of 8 out of 10s. So I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for it, but there's people wondering about the change in direction for the game, I think.
Are you not so convinced by the new Lara?
I don't know. I mean, I think what they've done, I think they had to do. It's been such a long time since the first series of games, and then Crystal Dynamics took it on, and they did 3 games, which were very similar to the core design games. And I think, and then they've had quite a big break. So I think they've had to rethink it. And from listening to Crystal Dynamics talk, they've been really influenced obviously by what happened with Star Trek and Batman, and they thought, look, the reboots are popular, let's have a go at that. So that really seems to have been the driving force behind this game.
It does seem, I mean, actually it's interesting that you say about the previous 3 games. I mean, I agree that they are much closer to kind of classic Tomb Raider than this one. But I do think you get a lot of groundwork in those games in terms of just the kind of the way the camera angles work, the way that the kind of ledges are highlighted and things of that nature. That all obviously builds for the reboot.
Yeah, and I get the feeling that one thing this game does do, although there is a certain amount of suspicion a lot of the time about how open the world is, and it does feel like it's very narrative driven with some open hub sections. But from what people are saying and from my experiences with the game, things like the climbing element are much more open than they are in Uncharted. So you get much more of a feel of Lara interacting with the environment in a kind of naturalistic way. I don't know if you agreed.
No, I think it's. I mean, the whole open sort of versus linear part of it is quite interesting actually, because I feel like it occasionally either doesn't communicate what it wants you to do, or can't quite decide for itself what it wants you to do, or something. Because I mean, there are some. All the environments look quite similar, but some are much more open, and sometimes you'll see something and it'll be a lovely piece of backdrop and you'll think, and you'll continue down the corridor. Other times you'll be like, actually I can go and hunt that, or I can go and explore that, find some salvage, or whatever it might be. But I do think it's quite elegant. I just think it's perhaps not always as obvious.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we should probably talk a little bit about the setup for the game and the fact that it starts with Lara as, I think, a 21-year-old.
Yeah,
and she's left university, and she's decided, as we all do when we leave university, to go and find a mythical island in the South Pacific. And so she's bundled up a few of her mates and got on board this ship, and there's a terrible storm and the ship is wrecked, luckily on the island that she was looking for. But unluckily it's full of psychos and ne'er-do-wells who wish Lara and her friends a lot of harm.
Yes, it's kind of not the best kind of gap year choice of any that I've seen. But it's funny that you don't see kind of the archaeological aspect of Lara Croft's personality, which obviously spurs her to go to this island in the first place, quite quickly becomes submerged between the if you must, I'll kill a bunch of people aspect of Lara's personality, which kind of emerges in response to these scavengers on the island and to just the general harsh climate on the island in general.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things about the game design is that there are tombs in the game, but they're of a secondary nature. Most of them you can decide to go and explore them and solve the puzzles. They're not part of the main thrust of the gameplay, so it's almost a slight casual nod to old school Lara, but it's a nod you don't have to follow, which is kind of weird in a sense. It's like the whole heritage of the game becoming a sort of sideshow.
Yeah, it is strange. I mean, although I do think that actually the optional missions are some of my favourite parts of the game, just because actually you get a sense of what Crystal might have achieved with, say, the original format for Tomb Raider, if they just built in some of the kind of narrative vehicles that they have in the new one. Because I mean, as you explore these side missions, Lara comments on things as she passes them. She might say, that looks like late Mayan, blah 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 blah, or she might, yes, you can see there's a kind of evidence of a kind of a servant aristocracy kind of relationship here or something, and that's all completely incidental, and it's actually all lovely because you're just solving the puzzle as you probably would any Tomb Raider puzzle, regardless of release year, but you just have that much more context and it gives it much more I don't know, naturalness.
Yeah. I mean, it feeds much more back towards Toby Gard, the guy who originally came up with Lara Croft, was very heavily influenced, I think, by the Indiana Jones films, and she was always meant as a female Indiana Jones. So those moments where she's talking about relics that she's found and mythology, they really hark back to Indiana Jones. Whereas the rest of the game, Crystal Dynamics have talked about how First Blood was an influence, and Ripley from Tomb Raider was an influence, and things like they were really heavily inspired by the film 127 Hours. This whole idea of people discovering themselves through enormous hardship, and I don't think you can argue. And looking at the footage now, you can't argue that Lara goes through a heck of a lot of hardship on this island.
Some would say she goes through a bit too much hardship, really. I mean, like, there are times when, every platform will collapse, everything will have some sort of hidden spike. There are bushes which can knock you over, and pretty much everything any machine you go near explodes, essentially, and Lara reacts as you would expect somebody to react when they're in extreme pain.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
They've really layered, especially early on in the game, they've really layered on the punishment, haven't they? I mean, she does sort of get a really nasty injury when she falls on a spike, and then she's beaten up, and then she's hung upside down, and then she's beaten up again, and then she escapes, and then there's that scene which has caused a lot of controversy when she's kind of groped by one of the savages on the island, and lots of questions were asked about, well, does Lara Croft as a female character have to go through this kind of sexualized trauma?
Yeah,
but I don't know. I mean, in the game, it didn't feel actually that it didn't. A lot has been made of it, but it didn't feel.
It doesn't feel. Yeah, I mean, I think it's. Yeah, I mean. It has been blown out of proportion, but I'm not convinced by how they've kind of sort of matured Lara into somebody who isn't just an objectified female heroine. I mean, the sheer extent of the punishment that's inflicted on her just seems a little bit gratuitous at times, and the whole sort of, the moment when she's groped by that particular bloke, there's a kind of an odd case of having your cake and eating it, where it sort of clearly wants to conjure the spectre of sexual violence, but then it backs away from it very quickly, and you just feel a bit like, well, this feels cheap and tacky. Either don't do it, or do it in a way which actually explores it appropriately and gives it, the respect it deserves as a subject.
Yeah, I mean, I totally sympathise with what Rhiannon Pratchett has been saying about the character, in that they've made this character more vulnerable because it's an origin story, and she's not vulnerable because she's female, but she's vulnerable because she's like a human character, and they want to portray that, the idea that as a hero she had to go from being someone who was scared to someone who's much stronger, and I kind of really buy into that. But in the game, actually, and this is what a lot of reviewers have said, it all happens remarkably quickly. From her first kill, where she's staggering about, filled with remorse, vomiting, and about 5 minutes of gameplay later, you're stabbing people in the face with axes. And
it's less than 5 minutes, actually. I think it's like literally the next 30 seconds. She just goes, "Oh well, I've done it now." They're all basically the same.
In for a penny, in for a pound.
It kind of catches you out a little bit with that, because there's that moment, and then I think shortly after that, another character asks her. She says, "Oh, I've had to kill somebody to survive," and her mentor, this Roth character who's stranded on the island with her, tells her over the radio, "Oh, well, that must have been incredibly hard." And she's like, "Actually, what disturbs me is how easy it was." And I thought that was actually quite a nice response to the, criticisms of it being quite a laboured transition. Actually, it can be.
I wonder if it is then a problem in some ways with storytelling through video games, because I think those kind of big transitions, which are like in a film, they can really telegraph a character very quickly changing and becoming more determined, and they can do that through lots of close cuts to faces and that sort of thing. And they can really control the experience and show you a character changing. But in a video game, I think it's much harder for them to show quick character turnarounds. Maybe it's not Crystal Dynamics' fault. Maybe it's the medium. I don't know.
It's definitely a larger problem, isn't it? I think there's a definite incongruity between the cutscenes and the sequence where you're given control. And I sort of think maybe they could have learned from something like, say, Heavy Rain, where you have this kind of ability to choreograph small actions in the world and kind of almost decide their mood, like opening a door can be you can decide how dramatic you want that to be. And I don't think that's a perfect game by any means, but I feel like that tries to bridge that division, whereas Lara Croft is just happy to kind of be one person in the cutscenes and a completely different person when you're in control.
Yeah, Ludo narrative dissonance.
Yeah.
I love using that phrase.
Yeah.
It's not one you can usually pull out in the pub on a Sunday afternoon.
Well, you can. You won't have much of a conversation afterwards.
Depending
on who you're talking to.
You just, exactly. People will just get up and leave. Actually, you mentioned Heavy Rain there, and obviously there's a similarity here in the use of quick time events. These kind of choreographed action sequences where you have to press you have to press a button really, really quickly to get the next sequence type, which I've never been keen on, even when they were used in Shenmue, which is a lovely, gorgeous, beautiful game on the Dreamcast. It's possibly the worst interactive mechanic ever created, I feel. I don't know if you agree.
That's the headline. Yeah. I think it's I think certainly in Tomb Raider in the new Tomb Raider they feel quite flat. I mean, essentially quite often I found myself dying first time and then being respawned literally like a few feet before where it happened. And when that kicks in, you just sort of think, well, what is the point? I mean, either make it a cutscene or just give me some sort of slightly more meaningful power over this sort of thing. Having said that, I think there's a certain art to the way QTEs are constructed, to how they're kind of woven into cutscenes nowadays. You see this in Dead Space 3, which is released recently. And so I think it's possible to admire them, but it's rarely possible to have fun with them, which is kind of the point.
But obviously as watching the video as we talk, it is a beautiful game, isn't it? I mean, the island is lusciously drawn. It's amazing use of lighting. It's gorgeous as a kind of end game. One of the final big games we're probably going to see in this current generation. It's a real kind of showcase, isn't it?
It is stunning, and it's as I say, I mean, when it does branch, when it becomes a more open game, that's all the more impressive, because obviously they don't have the luxury of setting the parameters quite as definitely as they do in the corridor moments. But I think in particular the animation system is worth picking up on, because I'm sure you can see here, I mean, there's definitely some Uncharted / Assassin's Creed sort of DNA in there in terms of how she tackles handholds and ledges and how she sort of moves across beams and things. But they've built in lots of sort of procedural stuff. I think that's probably the right way of describing it, where if you're walking past a surface, we might see at some point, she puts out her arm to steady herself on it, or if she walks past a fire, she'll kind of flinch away from it. She turns her upper body naturally as she moves, which gives it a real kind of flow and believability. So I think I agree. It's a stunning game, and it's nice to see stunning games. Obviously in the wake of next gen reveals, and with all these games being demoed on high-end PC builds for console. It's nice when you can actually pop something in your hard drive and into your Xbox, and
it just does look yeah. So. What did you think about the multiplayer? Because to me, again, Crystal Dynamics have said, well, we wanted to challenge ourselves, and so and then they said, well, let's try to do something different. Let's add multiplayer. But I felt that with Uncharted, when they added multiplayer, and with Assassin's Creed as well, you really got the sense that they were trying to explore that idea of multiplayer. Assassin's Creed had that whole kind of cat and mouse feel to the multiplayer, and Uncharted had some of the character and narrative in its multiplayer. But Tomb Raider really does feel as though they've almost bought in an identikit IKEA multiplayer.
No, it's completely. I mean, it's not bad. It's it sort of hangs together. The maps are quite readable. You can kind of you jump into them, and you're immediately kind of forming strategies as you run. But this is exactly the same. Sort of progress ladder sort of driven third-person shooter we've been playing for about 5 years now. You've got 2 weapons. You've got grenades. You've got kind of booster abilities you can plug in. And there is there's a sprinkling of the acrobatics you get in the main game, in as much as you can climb up surfaces with the climbing axe, you can use zip lines and things of that nature. But it's if you play any third-person shooter online this generation, you'll have played this one, and you'll have probably played a better version of this one. So I'm I would rather. I think you were saying earlier, actually, you'd rather they'd have spent more time on the single player, maybe added some more chapters to that campaign, because it's not the longest game in the world.
No. How long have you been playing so far?
It's not. I've got about sort of 3-4 hours in, but it's. I think it's kind of in the 10 sort of hour kind of range. It could definitely do with some more meat on the bones, but then I guess that's what DLC is for.
Yeah.
So yes.
Yeah, then I'm sure that'll be springing up soon, won't it?
Probably, yeah. No, I'm sure they'll start talking about it in the not too distant future. And so, do you think at this point, I mean, is this a version of Lara that you want to see, kind of perhaps, either taken forward into another game that's very similar, or maybe taken into a completely different kind of Tomb Raider game? I mean, what do you think they should do from this point on?
I think they've. It's going to be tricky for them now because they've played that reboot card now, haven't they? And they can never play that again. And a lot. I think obviously we've seen the second Batman reboot film. We've seen Christopher Nolan's follow-up to Batman Begins, and that was really, really good. We've not seen yet the Star Trek, what they do with Star Trek now. It's been rebooted. I think once you've played that, let's go back to the beginning card, it's quite difficult. So I would like to see. I mean, I think it's an enjoyable and interesting game, and a beautiful game in a lot of ways. And I think I'd like to see. I don't want them to change it. I don't think it should become a co-op game. I don't think it should do a Dead Space 3 on it or anything like that. I think they need to now. They've invested in this whole idea of the beginning of a survivor, and they need to progress now onto like Lara's first proper adventure as a hardened adventurer. I think so. I think they need to carry on this line, this kind of gritty character-led adventure.
Okay, it doesn't have to be that gritty. I mean, she's an academic fundamentally, isn't she? She could just. I mean, it could be Lara applies for Arts Council funding, which is a lot grittier than any.
Maybe that will be the iPhone spin-off.
Yeah, the Facebook version.
Yeah,
I think. I'm interested to see whether they continue the Guardian of Light sub-series, which was a big hit on Xbox Live Arcade, and is very co-op driven, and obviously very completely different view of Lara, much more about the kind of the old sort of saucy Lara.
Saucy Lara,
yes. Lara sauce, whatever. But I hope they keep that game because it just seems like something that would get them a lot of goodwill, and it's a completely different flavour to what they've got with the new Tomb Raider.
Yeah. But I think I definitely feel they're doing the right thing. I think for this generation, it'd be interesting to see what happens with Lara in the next whatever they call the next Xbox.
Well, yes. Well, we shall wait and see. Well,
Okay, so that's Tomb Raider by Crystal Dynamics, published by Square Enix, and it's out now on PS3, Xbox 360, and PC.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Bye bye.